The Dark Secrets of Richard Nixon, Watergate, and the Fall of a President. It was the early hours of June 17, 1972. 5 men in dark suits crept through the quiet halls of the Watergate office building in Washington, D.C. Their mission was secret, their orders clear: break into the headquarters of the Democratic Party. But as they fiddled with locks and wiretaps, something went wrong. A guard noticed tape on a door. Police were called. Suddenly, the burglars, who thought they were invisible, were caught red-handed. What seemed like a small burglary would soon explode into one of the biggest scandals in American history. And at the center of it all was a man who had reached the very top of power, President Richard Nixon. This is the story of how lies, secrets, and paranoia brought down the most powerful man in the world. Richard Nixon's rise. Before Watergate, Richard Nixon's life looked like a true American success story. Born in 1913 in a small California town, Nixon came from a poor family. His father ran a struggling grocery store. His mother was strict and religious. Nixon grew up working hard, selling vegetables and helping in the family shop. He wasn't rich. He wasn't the most popular kid, but he was smart, disciplined, and fiercely ambitious. Nixon studied law, served in the Navy during World War II, and entered politics in the late 1940s. His sharp debating skills and tough anti-communist stance made him rise quickly. By 1952, he was vice president under Dwight D. Eisenhower. But Nixon also had a darker side. He felt the world was against him. He distrusted the press. He thought elites looked down on him. This chip on his shoulder would follow him all his life. Nixon and power. In 1960, Nixon ran for president against John F. Kennedy. It was one of the closest elections in U.S. history. Nixon lost, and the defeat crushed him. Many thought his career was over. But Nixon refused to quit. He returned 8 years later, in 1968, this time riding a wave of promises to restore law and order during a time of chaos, riots, the Vietnam War, and political unrest. He won. Richard Nixon became the 37th President of the United States. At first, his presidency looked strong. He opened relations with China. He began peace talks with the Soviet Union. He promised to end the Vietnam War. For a while, Nixon seemed destined for greatness. But underneath the success was a man obsessed with control. He hated critics. He made enemies lists of journalists and politicians. He secretly taped conversations in the Oval Office, and he believed winning re-election in 1972 was the only way to protect himself. That obsession led to Watergate, the break-in. The Democratic National Committee headquarters was inside the Watergate complex. Nixon's re-election team wanted inside information, plans, secrets, strategies, so they hired burglars to wiretap phones and steal documents. But the job was sloppy. The burglars were caught. At first, the story seemed small, just a strange break-in. Few people knew it would lead to the president himself. Yet as reporters started digging, cracks appeared. The burglars had ties to Nixon's campaign. Money linked back to secret political funds. Step by step, the scandal grew larger. Nixon denied everything. He called the investigation a witch hunt. He thought he could cover it up, but the truth had a way of leaking out. What started as a simple burglary was now turning into a storm that could shake the White House itself. Nixon's secret world of tapes, cover-ups, and enemies lists was about to be exposed. And soon, the world would learn that even the President of the United States was not above the law. When the Watergate burglars were arrested in June 1972, the story barely made headlines. It looked like a simple crime. 5 men caught breaking into an office. No one thought it would connect to the President of the United States. But Nixon and his team knew the truth. These men weren't random thieves. They were tied to his re-election campaign. If anyone dug deeper, Nixon's presidency could be destroyed. So, the cover-up began. Buying silence. Right after the break-in, Nixon's aides scrambled. They raised money in secret. Bundles of cash were passed around to keep the burglars quiet. One by one, promises were made. Don't talk. We'll take care of you. This wasn't just damage control. It was a conspiracy. The White House itself was helping criminals hide the truth. On tape, Nixon later told his chief of staff, "You've got to keep the cap on this thing." But the more they tried to bury it, the more suspicious it looked. The reporters who wouldn't stop. While Nixon's men worked in secret, 2 young reporters at the Washington Post refused to let the story die. Their names were Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. At first, their editors were skeptical. Who cared about a small burglary? But Woodward and Bernstein followed the money. They chased leads, knocked on doors, and kept asking questions. Slowly, a bigger picture formed. The burglars weren't acting alone. They were connected to Nixon's re-election campaign, known as CREEP, the Committee to Re-elect the President. Their stories began to shake Washington. Still, Nixon laughed it off. "This is a third-rate burglary," he said. "Nothing to worry about." But the reporters were right, and they were just getting started. The FBI connection. Behind the scenes, the FBI also smelled something strange. The investigation kept leading back to the White House. One official in the FBI, later nicknamed Deep Throat, secretly leaked information to Woodward and Bernstein. He told them, "Follow the money." Those 3 words became legendary. Every payment, every shady transaction, led closer to the Oval Office, Nixon's inner circle. Inside the White House, Nixon's top aides, H.R. Haldeman, John Ehrlichman, and John Mitchell, were working overtime to keep the truth hidden. They pressured the CIA to block the FBI's investigation. They shredded documents. They lied under oath. Nixon himself approved these plans. On secret recordings, he told aides to push back, to silence the investigators, to stonewall the truth. But lies are like cracks in a dam. They only hold for so long before the flood comes. The tapes begin. Here's the twist no one knew at the time. Nixon had installed a secret taping system in the White House. Every conversation in the Oval Office was being recorded. He said it was for history. But these tapes would become his greatest enemy. Every order, every scheme, every plan to cover up Watergate was caught on tape. And when investigators learned about this, Nixon's fate was sealed. Winning the election. Ironically, while the scandal grew, Nixon was still winning. In November 1972, he was re-elected in a landslide. He carried 49 out of 50 states. It was one of the biggest victories in American history. But behind that victory was rot. Watergate wasn't going away. Investigators, reporters, and even Congress smelled blood. Nixon thought his huge win made him untouchable. But soon, the truth would prove no president, no matter how powerful, was above the law. By early 1973, the cover-up was falling apart. The burglars started talking. Top aides resigned. The FBI uncovered more secrets. And the Senate announced a full investigation into Watergate. Cameras would roll. Witnesses would testify. And the world would watch as the walls of the White House began to crack. By 1973, Richard Nixon's cover-up was collapsing. His aides were under investigation. Reporters wouldn't stop digging. And the American people were asking one question. What did the president know, and when did he know it? Congress decided it was time for the truth to come out in the open. They created the Senate Watergate Committee, a group of senators tasked with investigating the scandal on live television. For the first time, Americans would hear, in detail, how deep the corruption went. Television brings the truth home. In the summer of 1973, the hearings began. Millions of Americans turned on their TVs and watched. It was like a courtroom drama, except this wasn't fiction. It was real, and the president's future was on the line. Witness after witness testified. They spoke of cash payments, political spying, and attempts to stop the FBI. Some admitted their own crimes. Others pointed directly at the White House. For many Americans, it was the first time they realized just how far Nixon's team had gone to win and protect power. One of the most dramatic moments came when John Dean, Nixon's White House counsel, took the stand. Dean had been part of the cover-up, but now, under oath, he turned against his former boss. He calmly described meetings with Nixon where the president approved hush money and gave orders to stop investigations. Dean even warned Nixon at the time, "There is a cancer on the presidency." Those words sent shockwaves across the nation. A president knowingly breaking the law? For many Americans, it was unthinkable. But Dean's testimony made it undeniable. The secret tapes revealed. As explosive as Dean's testimony was, the hearings revealed something even bigger. A former White House aide let slip that Nixon had a secret taping system in the Oval Office. Every conversation, every meeting, recorded. It was a bombshell. If those tapes were real, they could prove once and for all whether Nixon was lying. The committee demanded the tapes. Nixon refused. He claimed executive privilege, saying presidents had the right to keep secrets. But the pressure only grew. Everyone wanted to know, what was on those tapes? The country divides. As the hearings continued, the country split into two camps. Some still believed Nixon, convinced he was the victim of political enemies. Others were outraged, ready to see him resign or be removed. For weeks, televisions carried the hearings into American homes. Ordinary citizens watched history unfold in real time. It wasn't just politics anymore. It was a national drama. And at the center of it all was Nixon, isolated in the White House, growing more paranoid each day. Nixon strikes back. Nixon tried to fight back. He gave speeches claiming his innocence. He called the hearings unfair. He even staged dramatic press conferences declaring, "I am not a crook." But the evidence was piling up. His aides were resigning. His enemies were circling. And those tapes, the tapes he refused to hand over, were becoming the symbol of his guilt. The longer he resisted, the more the public began to believe he had something to hide. Cliffhanger. By the end of the Senate hearings, one thing was clear. The Watergate scandal was no longer just about a burglary. It was about lies, abuse of power, and the very future of the presidency. The country had heard the witnesses. They had learned about the tapes. And now, the fight would move to the courts. Would Nixon's secret recordings see the light of day? And if they did, what truths would they reveal?